Okay, so for this part of the NEA, we'll be looking at research. And the first thing to do when you're doing your research or before you start your research is to plan it out. Think about what you need to do and what you need to find out. Okay, so in terms of as a starter, we're going to do the etymology. We're going to look at the etymology and definition characteristics to help us really think about planning and what actually it means to plan. So just have a quick listen to the etymology of the word planning, and hopefully it might help a little bit with the understanding of like where it came from.
Etymology. Late 17th century, from French, from earlier plant ground plan, plain surface, influenced in sense by Italian pianta plan of building. Compare with plant.
Okay, so the next thing to do is we're going to try and define the word planning. Okay, so what do you think planning means? So if you would just spend 30 seconds writing that down now. Okay, so this is the definition that I've found off the internet for exactly what planning means.
Planning is the process of deciding in detail how to do something before you actually start to do it.
As you can see, detailed process, like thinking carefully through what you're doing and what you need to do beforehand before you actually start to do it. Okay, now if you think about what type of characteristics or words you might use to help you define the word planning. Okay, so words are kind of associated with planning. Just 30 seconds on that. Okay, so these are some of the words that I found.
Arranging, blueprinting, calculating. Charting, choreographing. Designing, framing, laying out. Mapping, out, organizing, preparing.
Okay, so I think some of the important ones there are kind of mapping out, organizing, preparing. I think these three are probably the most important ones that helps to think about carefully what it means and what you need to do. Okay, can you give some examples next of maybe something that you would plan out before you did it? So just an example of something you would plan before you did it, and just write down your example. Okay, so this is what I've put.
The trip needs careful planning.
Okay, so if you were going on holiday, you would carefully think about what you need to bring, you know, how long the journey is going to take, what food you might need to bring with you, etc. So a trip would need planning carefully. Now, if you can spend 30 seconds thinking about a non-example, something where you might do something where you haven't planned it or you don't plan it. Okay. Okay, so this is what I've come up with.
Jumping in to make something without thinking it through.
All right, so we're going to now go on and just watch a video in relation to primary and secondary sources. So if you're planning out your research, it's important that you research both from primary and secondary sources. And this video here is just going to help you explain what that means and maybe give you some examples and the types of things that you could be thinking about. You just have a watch of this video and then list, and whilst you're watching it, just list 5 things that you have learned from the video.
The content of your research project will be made up of primary and secondary sources. Primary and secondary sources come in many different formats, and there are benefits for referencing both types in your assignment. It can be difficult to figure out if a source is considered primary or secondary, but don't worry, because we'll explain the differences here so that you can decide which are best to use in your assignment. Primary sources are first-hand accounts of an event, topic, or historical time period. Anything that contains original information on a topic is considered a primary source. Examples of primary sources include things like letters or personal diaries or journals, original photographs, speeches, newspaper reports, creative works like paintings, plays, and music, and research data or surveys. It's a good idea to use primary sources in research papers because it allows you to form your own argument to defend your thesis, since the information you're using is unfiltered by another person's point of view. You're able to critique an original work using your own ideas. Secondary sources interpret, critique, or analyze primary sources. It is information that is created or published from primary sources. Examples of secondary sources include things like textbooks, essays or reviews, encyclopedias, newspaper articles that analyze or discuss events and ideas, and criticisms and commentaries. It's a good idea to use secondary sources in research papers because you can learn about new perspectives that you may not have even considered, and they can also strengthen your own argument in the assignment. For example, if you're writing a history paper about how the diversity of a city shifted during a certain time period, you could use data from the US Census Bureau to compare populations across the decades. This type of information would be considered a primary source, as it's data that's simply been collected and compiled. There is no analysis. That's what you'll be doing in the paper. For the same topic, you could also use an article from a newspaper that reviews the data and draws conclusions or analysis from it, such as other ways in which the population might change or grow over time. Some sources, like scholarly journals and newspapers, can serve as both a primary and a secondary source, depending on which article you're reading. Articles that include things like eyewitness accounts or interviews and are published close to the time of the event you're researching would be a primary source. Articles that are published after the fact and include analysis or critiques are secondary sources. Primary and secondary sources can both strengthen and improve your research immensely by providing you with information to create an argument and defend your thesis statement. Now that you know how to differentiate between them, try using them in your own assignment.
Okay, so these are the 5 things that I've learned from the video, which I thought were useful. Primary sources of first-hand accounts. Original info is a primary source or primary sources, so something that's originally been found. Primary documents might be letters, original photographs, creative work, or surveys. So surveys like questionnaires and things like that. Primary data is unfiltered and you can form your own argument, so your own point of view on something. Secondary sources are interpret, critique, analyze primary sources. So it's somebody else's point of view. If you found something on the internet, like a website, that website will be usually a secondary source because they've taken information from somewhere else and then they're talking about that item that they're gathering. Okay, so now we're going to listen to this explanation of collecting primary and secondary data, and then you're going to be answering these questions. Okay, you can start maybe answering some of those as you're listening, or you might want to wait till the end. It's entirely up to you. So just have a listen now.
Collecting primary and secondary data. Primary and secondary data. Considering the context of a design, Research into the different factors that will or could influence the design and assessing the user and stakeholder needs will require many different kinds of data to be collected. You may be able to gather information from carrying out physical tests on something, questionnaires, surveys, interviews, or studies you conduct yourself into the situation. Data gathered by yourself such as this is called primary data. Primary data is any data collected by the designer themselves for the specific purpose of solving the problem. Primary data is also called first-hand or raw data. Collecting primary data is usually quite labor-intensive, and as a result can be time-consuming and expensive.
Okay, now I'm just going to give you 1 minute to answer those questions based on the information that you've learned. Okay, so the first question, when considering the context of a design, what needs to be considered? Research into different factors that will or could influence the design. How can you gather information? Carry out physical tests on something, questionnaires, surveys, interviews, or studies you conduct yourself. And what is data gathered by yourself called? Primary data. Why is primary data collected by the designer? For the specific purpose of solving the problem. And what is primary data also called? First-hand or raw data. Why is primary data time-consuming and expensive? It's usually quite labor-intensive, which just means it takes quite a long time to do by somebody. Okay, so again, just have a listen to this explanation, and then we're going to have a go at answering these questions afterwards.
If you were designing a bespoke product for one particular client, then you would interview them, ask questions and test things out to see what they thought. However, if there were numerous stakeholders, then this process would need to be repeated with each of them. If the product you are designing is to be marketed and aimed at a wide user group, then you may need to carry out hundreds of questionnaires, interviews, and tests across the spectrum of different users in order to collect enough accurate primary data. Failure to carry out sufficient research can lead to inaccurate primary data, and in turn a product that does not fulfill all of the users' or stakeholders' needs.
Okay, so just 1 minute trying to answer the questions. Okay, so question 1, why would you want to interview someone when designing? If you're designing a bespoke product for one particular client. So why would you sometimes have to interview a number of different people when designing? if there were numerous stakeholders. When might you need to carry out a questionnaire? If the product you were designing is also to be marketed and aimed at a wider user group. How do you collect enough data in order for it to be accurate if you were designing for a wider user group? Carry out hundreds of questionnaires, interviews and tests across a spectrum of different users in order to collect enough accurate primary data. And what can failure to carry out sufficient research lead to? An inaccurate primary data, and in turn a product that does not fulfill the users or stakeholders' needs. Okay, I'll just have a listen to this section and then we'll have a go at these questions next.
Secondary data is second-hand data which has already been collected by someone else for the same or a similar purpose. Secondary data is usually much easier to find than primary data, but because it has already been done, it may already be out of date. Secondary data can be gathered from a range of sources, such as the internet, websites, books, test reports, journals, etc. Using secondary data can save a lot of time as it is much quicker than carrying out testing, interviews and questionnaires, etc., and is therefore much less expensive. However, the data collected is not as accurate as primary data because it is not specific to the designer's or user's exact needs. It will most likely have been collected for other purposes slightly different to those required. It may have been conducted on a slightly different user group or done some time ago when people's attitudes or opinions may have been different due to shifts in trends, beliefs, economic climate, etc. The methods used to collect the data and the reasons for doing so may also be significantly different to those required.
Okay, so if you just spend a minute then answering these questions, please. Okay, so question one, what is secondary data? Second-hand data. So you've not done it, somebody else has. Somebody else has done the research or gathered the data. Is the secondary data is secondary data much easier or harder to find than primary data? It's much easier. Where can secondary data be gathered from? Range of sources, internet, website, books, test reports, journals, etc. What can secondary data save? A lot of time, as it's much quicker than carrying out tests, interviews or questionnaires. Why is secondary data not as accurate as primary data? Because it's not specific to the designer's or user's exact needs. Okay, so this is an example of a research plan. So you can see here, I've kind of done like a plan explaining exactly what type of research I'm planning on carrying out. So the first method of research I intend to do is user research. I will write some questions that will help me find out about their interests, what type of products they might want, how much they may have to spend, etc. I'll hopefully ask a few different people to get a range of different ideas. This will be primary research because I'm finding out the information myself. So secondary research, the second type of research that I will do will be internet. I intend to look at how I can make my product sustainable and innovative. I will also look at a wide range of existing products to find out what they look like and how they work, how much they cost, etc. I will also look at what customers had to say on the product. Is the customer feedback, what the customer had to say on the product in the customer feedback section. And again, this is secondary research because I'm not finding it firsthand, etc. So here we've got third method of research, looking at existing products to find out about how big they are, etc., how much they cost maybe, and primary. Fourth method of research, inspiration boards. So I'm going to look on the internet for images of existing products and things like that. Fifth method of research would be like textbook. So I can look in a textbook to find suitable materials I could use. And then the sixth method, if I got time, will be like YouTube research. So I could have a look on YouTube to find out, maybe for Ask an Expert, to find out how they might make a product. So watch a video how someone's made something in the past similar to what I'm going to do. Okay, so this person here is talking about wants and needs of products, and it's quite interesting what he had to say about the wants and needs of a different design. So again, if you just watch the video and then write down 5 things you've learned about the video.
So in this episode, I thought I would just grab a cup of tea and talk about the real user needs. And when I say real user needs, is what separates that, I guess, app design mentality from user experience or experience design mentality. It's almost like 2 different beasts or 2 different ways to look at things. One is very specific, another one is very holistic. And this is what we really want as user experience designers or, researchers, product designers. You want to be as holistic as possible so that you look at things very broadly before jumping into the depth of it and defining the detail. And I think Henry Ford's quote on his Ford engines and machinery and, manufacturing cars summarizes pretty well that if he would ask of what people actually wanted, they would just respond with, let's say, faster horses, and covering it with wants and desires instead of what actually they need, what's feasible, what's realistic and pragmatic enough to innovate gradually. And of course, it might sound grander than it really is, because that machinery development lasted years and decades before it was at that feasible state where you could roll out and actually solve problems and make it affordable as well. It's akin of what, let's say, Elon Musk is doing right now with space travel. Or even EVs and things of that nature. It's really just scratching the surface, because most people are not going to be able to afford, and probably for our next 2 or 3 generations, nobody's going to be able to afford until we reach the tipping point where it's cheap enough to produce those experiences, and therefore people can opt in, from customer experience perspective and as well as product or UX experience. And another take on it, I guess, is looking at it from a business perspective, because the wants are very expensive. They're very unrealistic. They're very idealistic. They're very long-term vision focused. That's where you want to get to. Realistically, the first step to take to get to that, and almost like a step to climb up and over time develop, is going to be the needs still. Because again, from design thinking perspective, from meaningful innovation perspective, you would want to take that Venn diagram of desirability, viability, feasibility, meaning what's actually going to generate cash and is cost effective from business perspective, what's engineering wise or technology wise or solutioning wise. Even if there's maybe no engineering, maybe you're just going to make your own no code solution or a website or a printout or just a spoken service. What can you actually achieve? What skill sets do you have? Things of that nature. Like, what's the cost of it again? And the last bit is that desirability, which captures a lot of that want, but want should come after the needs are addressed. It could be version 2, version 3, maybe it's later on. And a lot of designers kind of get stuck. They get into that thinking pattern, which is not really realistic, or it's not going to aid their growth in the end, or maybe even get that opportunity they seek. Is that they jump into the cool, the trendy, the something which is wants and flying cars. And this is a successful product, like let's say Uber for taxi services. And Uber itself has a very long history, and there is a lot of, pivots and a lot of developments you could read up. There's a lot of good books on that, but people didn't really need an app to do that. They might have wanted it to, let's say, have some sort of applet or a website where we can quickly order a taxi instead of calling up or raising their hand physically on a street and saying taxi. There was obviously a need for reliability, there was a need of flexibility, transparency, knowing how much you're going to be charged, trust of the actual service and person who's going to be driving you, that audit trail and actual service quality quality of source is actually what mattered. This is what people really need. How it's expressed, again, should have been done with very feasible, very convenient to the users, very viable from business perspective, so that it's, you know, it's generating revenue. It's not just kind of burning cash, or it doesn't take you 5 years or 10 years to actually bring it to the market. There's a lot of considerations, but you as a UX designer should be part of that. UX takes quite a big chunk of those decisions. And the needs is where the gold is, even from a user research perspective. When you engage with the people, you know, you always need to look behind the lines. You need to read into it, because they're going to tell you one thing, but that's just going to be attitudes. It's what people say. What you really would want to capture is their behaviors, or what they actually do in day-to-days and why they do it, what their decisions are like. This is the depth as a UX designer, where you need to dig deep and understand all the different means what they're using, all the different touch points of interaction, and why exactly what's happening, where are the biggest pain points, and then build their opportunities on top of that. And your hypothesis could have been, of course, again, as in many videos I described, an app. But an app is just a vessel, is just a channel to carry on that value. So let's say if a person would need someone, I don't know, to renovate their house, let's say, or to mow their lawn or something like that, we're not going to be like, oh, I need an app for it. What we actually need is a way to get someone in really quickly, confirm and understand that they're a good fit, let's say, and they're trusted. And then you as a designer could scheme, and if your team come up with ways to do that, be an app, it could be a website, omnichannel experience, it could be maybe something like a service of sorts where people subscribe to it and you just revisit it constantly. So it could be very holistic. People don't really need the apps. Hey there, it's future me. And as I was editing, I realized that I kind of need to illustrate this case much better. Back in the day, I was advising this company which tried to compete with this massive TaskRabbit equivalent in UK called My Builder. And it's an app, a service where you can quickly jump into it, say, this is what I need done, let's say gardening or building something in a house, breaking a wall. We had a big enough sample of the actual users to understand what they do every day. How do we get the tradesman? And not surprisingly, one of the blind spots which we find out was that the actual people, the customers in UK, choose to use Google and default to that. We just go on Google and say, I need this plasterer within this Wycombe area. Find me the local tradesmen or local businesses, show me the reviews, the star ratings. Can I send them an email? Can I use a contact form? Can I just call them up and quickly find out if they can give me a quote from what we know, or just schedule in an appointment somewhere later on? Instead of just competing with My Builder, now you also have to compete with Google, which is super ingrained. It answers that basic need to search and find a tradesman to do something for you. How would you compete with that? We had to resegment the market and look at the very specific needs, very specific tasks which customers need done, and within a specific vicinity, which is metropolitan areas. That then shaped and made the product very different. Instead of just an app which was big presumption competing with this giant and even bigger big tech giant, what's really important is to treat the needs of the user, to treat your needs as a designer instead of what you want or what's cool for the user, or what, let's say, another designer did, so you want to replicate that and work on something similar project or case study. Chances are they're not going to stick. It needs to be realistic enough. And then, let's say, I produce my challenges, which is the latest one, is about electric vehicles. And by 2030 in UK, all the new vehicles are going to have to be produced as electric vehicles. That's immediate need from the governance, from UK government perspective, but also that then trickles down to businesses. When it trickles down to the user or customer, they would maybe want a flying car, but you're never going to be able to deliver. Or maybe they would want like very affordable options of the vehicles. How would you actually bring it to the market and make it happen? And if you go with that notion that someone needed an app or sets of apps just to make it happen, I'm sure Uber makers back in the day had that notion, but they arrived over the years at something which is lasting, something sustainable, something that's governed. However, if you would start from scratch as a UX designer, not as a, let's say, just innovator or entrepreneur who's going to figure it out somewhat over the decades, you would need to address the needs, because the actual need here, or the actual need for those taxi users who want a better, more reliable, secure, convenient service, was really to get from point A to point B, again, securely, affordably, and things of that nature. That's the actual need, is to get from A to B. How you skin it, how you arrive at the solutions, is up to you to make the user experience better. But that's where you would engage with the appropriate discovery and user research to understand what those specific users, where can you add most value. And I can guarantee that the next Ubers or Lyfts are going to be very different, because it's not going to be just apps. It's going to be probably app plus something like maybe electric vehicle services or something along those lines, or maybe self-driving cars, because now Uber is so ingrained into the industry that it's going to persevere for years to come. It's almost like self-fulfilling Lindy effect, where every day they're in the market is another day more that they are going to be in the market in the long term. And unless they are innovating after that decade is gone, they might be challenged by something else, which maybe are going to address new generational needs or new developments within the different industry developing world, and all the different emerging tech trends, which I have videos on as well, which you should take a look, because it's appropriate and very important signals to consider, which are going to impact the needs. And let me just finish on this specific note, that wants do matter. Once it's all about the attitudes to our new products, the engagement, the excitement, the desire to actually use something. But that can be generated by addressing the needs, those deeply rooted inefficiencies they might experience in their daily life, those pain points. You can spark excitement with the people using your new product or your new app because it's so flashy or someone else used in their lives. But if they don't have actual need in their day-to-days, again, the need has to be addressed first and foremost. That's my thoughts though. What about yours? Leave them down below. If you like this video, also smash that like button. That certainly helps. Subscribe too if you like these type of videos. And on that note, I'll see you next time.
Okay, so it was quite a long video, that. But these are the 5 things that I thought that I really picked out that were good. When designing, try to look at the problem very broadly before jumping into the detail. Wants are very expensive and idealistic. The first step in designing are the needs. Good designers consider 3 aspects: viability, feasibility, and desirability. And then what are the things that should come after the need? Sorry, wants are the things that should come after the needs have been achieved. Okay, so a little bit of information on wants, needs, and values here. Just have a quick listen to this, and then we're answering these questions.
Needs, wants and values of the end user. One of the main considerations for any design must be the user group and their needs. While most products are designed for people, there are occasions when humans are not the main user. Custom-made or bespoke products are designed and made specifically for one particular person, and as a result can be expensive. However, the vast majority of products are designed for use by a particular group of people. The main person, or group of people, who will be using the product are known as the primary users. For example, the chairs in a secondary school classroom are designed with children aged between 11 and 16 years of age as the primary users.
Okay, so now I'm just going to give you a minute to try and answer those questions. Okay, so the first question, what is one of the main considerations for any design? The user group and their needs. Are products always designed just for humans? No. So you've got like animals, I suppose, quite a few other different aspects. Who are custom made or bespoke products designed and made for? One particular person. Who are the vast majority of products designed for? A particular group of people. What is the main purpose? Sorry, what is the main person or group of people who will be using the product known as the primary user? And what are the chairs in a secondary school classroom designed for? Sorry, who are they designed for? Children aged between 11 to 16 of age as primary users. Okay, so just have a listen to this section, and then again we'll try and answer some questions on that.
Products also have other, secondary, users who will have an interest or come into contact with the product in one way or another. These are known as stakeholders. For example, the school chair may also be sat on by teachers when sitting next to a student, or by parents or younger children at parents' evenings or school events. Caretakers or cleaning staff will come into contact with the chair, and while they may not sit on them, they will have to clean, stack or transport them around the school. The school management and governors will also hold an interest in the chair, as they will want it to be as inexpensive and long-lasting as possible. While it is not always possible to meet the needs of the user and all the stakeholders, a well-designed product will as far as possible meet the needs of the primary user and as many of the stakeholder needs as possible.
Okay, I'm only going to give you 30 seconds for these, so just try your best. See how quickly you can get it done. Okay, so it probably wasn't quite enough time that, but let's see how you got on. So what are the secondary users known as? Stakeholders. Who are the secondary users for a school chair? Teachers when sitting next to a student, or by parents or young children at parents' evening or on a school event. Why are cleaning staff classed as secondary users for a school chair? They will have to clean, stack, transport them around the school. That's the cleaning staff would just have to clean it, really. That's more the caretaker, isn't it? What are the management needs for a school chair? So be inexpensive, be long lasting. What do well-designed products as far as possible meet the needs of? They meet the needs of the user and the stakeholder. Okay, so that's the end of this first section. If you then go on and have a look at 2B, and there's some information there about different types of researching techniques. Okay, thank you.